Hello, dear ones. My name is Margaret. I'm 76 years old, and today I'm going to share with you a story that has consumed me for years. A story about family betrayal, about how my own son turned his back on me when I needed him most, and about how I learned that sometimes you need to show people the true meaning of the word toxic. Settle in, because this narrative will touch every fiber of your being, will make you question everything you know about a mother's love and family loyalty. It's a painful journey, full of twists that even I couldn't predict, but one that needs to be told. Imagine for a moment having dedicated your entire life to your children. Imagine having given up your dreams, your ambitions, your own happiness, to ensure they had everything. Imagine having been the rock, the safe harbor, the person who was always there, regardless of circumstances. And then, in a moment of vulnerability, when you need support the most, you discover that this same child, this person you loved unconditionally, not only abandons you but blames you for the problems in their own life. That was my reality for years, and today I'm going to tell you how it all began, and most importantly, how it all ended. My story isn't just about a wounded mother. It's about how family dynamics can become toxic when there's no communication, when there's manipulation, and when people choose sides without knowing the whole truth. It's about how someone can make you believe you're the problem, when, in reality, you're just a convenient scapegoat. But it's also about how I found the strength to defend myself, to show the world, and especially my son, who I really am, and what I'm capable of when I'm cornered. For decades, I believed that being a good mother meant accepting everything in silence, swallowing hurt feelings, always forgiving, even when I received no apologies. I believed my role was to be the emotional backbone of the family, absorb everyone's pain, and never show my own vulnerability. But you know what I learned? I learned that kindness isn't synonymous with weakness, and that there comes a time in life when we need to stop being doormats and start being warriors. And that's exactly what I did. This story has twists you'll never be able to predict. It has secrets that were buried for years, calculated revenge, and an ending that will leave you speechless. But above all, it's a story about redemption, about finding your voice after years of silence, and about how sometimes you need to destroy everything to rebuild on stronger foundations. If you've made it this far, it's because you recognize there's something special in this narrative. And I promise you won't regret staying until the end, because what I have to tell you will change your perspective on family relationships forever. So buckle up, because the journey we're about to take together will be intense, emotional, and above all, revealing. Now, before we begin this exciting journey, I need to ask something special of you. If this introduction touched your hearts, if you feel there's something in this story that needs to be heard, become part of our family here on the channel. Subscribe right now, because stories like this need to be shared, discussed, and most importantly, they need to find people who understand the complexity of human relationships. Give your like if you're ready for this emotional roller coaster. And in the comments, tell me, have you ever felt betrayed by someone you loved unconditionally? Your comments aren't just words typed on a screen. They're bridges of connection between souls who've gone through similar experiences. And believe me, reading each one gives me strength to continue sharing these stories that many would prefer to keep hidden. Your words remind me that I'm not alone on this journey, and that each story shared can be the balm someone needs to heal their own wounds. My story begins in 1947, in a small town in rural Pennsylvania. I was born into a working-class family. My father, Robert, was a coal miner, and my mother, Dorothy, worked as a seamstress from home to supplement the family income. We were a close-knit family, one of those where everyone knew each other, and one person's problems were everyone's problems. We had little in material terms, but our home was always filled with love, laughter, and that wonderful smell of apple pie that my mother made on Sundays. I grew up believing in true love, in those fairy tales where the prince finds the princess, and they live happily ever after. At 19, I met William at the local Methodist church. He was 2 years older, son of a successful local business owner, and had just returned from military service. William was everything a young woman like me could dream of. Handsome, educated, ambitious, and with a promising future ahead. Our courtship was the typical 1960s romance. Supervised meetings, walks in the park, Saturday movies, and lots of respect. We married in 1968, in a beautiful ceremony at the church where we met. I wore my mother's wedding dress, all altered and adapted, and I felt like the happiest woman in the world walking down the aisle arm in arm with my father. William looked elegant in his navy blue suit, smiling in that way that made my heart race. Our honeymoon was at Niagara Falls, and I remember as if it were yesterday, the feeling of living a dream. The first years of marriage were magical. William got a job as an engineer at a manufacturing company in Pittsburgh. We bought our first house, a modest 2-bedroom home in a quiet neighborhood, and started planning our family. I worked as a receptionist at a dental office, but dreamed of the day I could stay home taking care of our children. In 1971, I discovered I was pregnant with our first child. The joy I felt when the doctor confirmed the pregnancy is indescribable. William was radiant, already imagining teaching the boy to play baseball and fish at the lake. Throughout the entire pregnancy, he was the most attentive husband in the world, making sure I didn't carry even a shopping bag. David was born in April 1972, a beautiful and healthy baby who completely changed our lives. I fell head over heels in love with that little being who depended entirely on me. William was also a dedicated father, waking up with me during the nights to help with feedings and diaper changes. We were a perfect family, or at least that's what we believed. 2 years later, our daughter Jennifer was born. Now our family was complete, and I felt fulfilled like never before. I had left my job to dedicate myself entirely to the children, and William earned enough to maintain a comfortable standard of living. Our weekends were filled with family activities, picnics in the park, visits to grandparents, bicycle rides around the neighborhood. David grew up being an intelligent and charismatic boy. At school, he was always popular among classmates and had excellent grades. He was the type of child who made any mother proud. Jennifer, on the other hand, was more shy and introspective, preferring books to outdoor games. I loved the differences between my children and made sure to encourage each one's individuality. When David turned 16, William began pressuring him to follow in his footsteps in the engineering world. He wanted him to study mechanical or electrical engineering, to enter the company where he worked and build a solid career. But David had other plans. He wanted to be a teacher, dreamed of working at a prestigious private school, and making a difference in young people's lives. The discussions between father and son became increasingly frequent and heated. William couldn't understand how his son could waste his potential in a career he considered underpaid and undervalued. David, in turn, felt suffocated by paternal expectations and began rebelling in ways that broke my heart. I always tried to be the mediator between them, explaining to William that David needed to follow his own path and consoling David when he felt misunderstood. It was a difficult position because I loved them both deeply and hated seeing them fight. Many times I stayed awake all night, listening to discussions coming from David's room, my heart breaking with every harsh word exchanged between them. The situation at home became so tense that David began spending more time away. He got a part-time job tutoring younger students after school and threw himself headfirst into volunteer work at the local community center. I understood he was trying to prove to his father that his passion was legitimate, but I also saw how this distance was affecting our family. Jennifer, who had always been closer to me, began confiding her concerns about the atmosphere at home. She was only 14 years old, but was very mature for her age, and clearly perceived the tension between father and brother. We talked for long hours in her room, and I tried to reassure her, promising that everything would be fine, even when I wasn't sure of it myself. It was during this turbulent period that I met Rebecca at church. She was a woman a few years younger than me, recently divorced and mother of 2 small daughters. Rebecca was beautiful, outgoing, and had a way of speaking that drew attention. Initially, I felt sorry for her for going through a difficult divorce, and William and I invited her to dinner at our house several times. David, who was 17 at the time, was clearly fascinated by Rebecca from their first meeting. She treated his opinions about education seriously, asked intelligent questions about his volunteer work, and constantly praised him. I noticed how his eyes lit up when Rebecca paid attention to him, and part of me was happy to see him receiving the recognition he wasn't finding at home. What I didn't realize at the time was how Rebecca was deliberately cultivating this admiration. She always found ways to praise David in front of William, comparing my son's maturity and talent with the immaturity of other young people his age. She had a subtle way of making William feel like an incomprehensive father, always taking David's side in discussions about career. Gradually, Rebecca became a constant presence in our lives. She showed up on Sundays for lunch, participated in church events with us, and always seemed to need help with something. I didn't suspect anything, because she was always very kind to me, praised me as a mother and homemaker, and seemed genuinely grateful for our friendship. David graduated from high school in 1990, and to everyone's surprise, including his own, received a partial scholarship to study education at Penn State. William finally gave in, admitting that maybe his son had real talent for the field. I was over the moon with pride, seeing my son achieve his dream while simultaneously regaining his father's respect. It was during David's first year of college that I began noticing subtle changes in William's behavior. He started working later, went out for business meetings on weekends, and seemed distant when he was home. Initially, I attributed this to work stress and the fact that he was adapting to the empty nest, since Jennifer was also in her senior year of high school and spent a lot of time studying for college admission exams. Rebecca continued being a regular presence in our lives, but now she and William seemed to have developed their own friendship. They talked at length about business. She had started working as a real estate agent, and sometimes I found them laughing at jokes I hadn't heard. When this happened, they quickly changed the subject, and Rebecca always found a way to include me in the conversation. One night in October 1991, my world collapsed. Jennifer had gone out with friends to a movie, and I was in the kitchen preparing dinner when I heard William talking on the phone in the study. Something in his tone caught my attention. It was affectionate, intimate, different from the way he had been talking to me lately. I approached the half-open door and heard words that froze my blood. "I love you too, Rebecca. Soon we'll be able to be together forever." My first reaction was total shock. I stood there paralyzed, leaning against the hallway wall, feeling as if the ground had disappeared beneath my feet. 23 years of marriage, 2 children raised together, a lifetime built side by side. All of this was being destroyed by those words whispered over the phone. When William finished the call and left the study, he found me sitting in the living room, clearly shaken. He immediately noticed something was wrong, and when our eyes met, I saw guilt written all over his face. We didn't need words. We both knew that our marriage had just ended, even though neither of us was ready to say it out loud. The confrontation that followed was devastating. William didn't deny the affair. Instead, he seemed almost relieved that the secret was finally out. He told me he had been unhappy for years, that our marriage had become routine and passionless, that Rebecca made him feel young and alive again. Each word was like a knife twisting in my heart, not just because of the betrayal, but because of how easily he dismissed our entire life together. What hurt the most was discovering that the affair had been going on for over a year. All those business meetings, late nights at work, and moments of distance suddenly made sense. I felt like a fool for not having noticed sooner, for having trusted both of them completely while they were betraying me behind my back. The weeks that followed were a blur of lawyers, tears, and sleepless nights. William moved out of the house and in with Rebecca almost immediately, leaving me to explain to Jennifer what was happening to our family. My 17-year-old daughter, who was supposed to be focused on her college applications and graduation, instead had to deal with her parents' divorce and her father's betrayal. Jennifer was angry with William, which somehow made me feel both grateful for her support and guilty that she was caught in the middle of our mess. She refused to visit him at Rebecca's house and barely spoke to him when he called. I tried to encourage her to maintain a relationship with her father, despite my own hurt, because I knew that in the long run, she would need him in her life. David's reaction was completely different and much more devastating to me. When he came home from college for Christmas break, he already knew about the divorce. William had told him during one of their phone calls, but instead of being angry with his father, David seemed to blame me for the marriage's failure. "Mom, Dad told me you two had been growing apart for years," he said during one of our conversations. "Maybe if you had tried harder to understand him, to support his dreams instead of always focusing on us kids, this wouldn't have happened." I was speechless. Here was my son, whom I had defended countless times against his father's criticism, whom I had supported through every dream and ambition, telling me that our family's destruction was somehow my fault. It felt like being stabbed by the person I least expected to hurt me. Rebecca, I later learned, had been very clever in her manipulation of David. During all those family dinners and church events, she had been subtly planting seeds about how underappreciated his father was, how William was such a visionary who deserved a partner who truly understood his ambitions. She painted herself as the woman who could give William what I apparently couldn't, and somehow convinced David that his father's happiness was more important than his mother's pain. The divorce was finalized in 1992, and I found myself starting over at 45 years old. William was generous with the settlement, probably out of guilt, so I was able to keep the house and had enough money to live comfortably. But money couldn't fill the emotional void or heal the betrayal I felt, especially from David. Jennifer started college at Georgetown University that fall, studying international relations, and I was incredibly proud of her achievements, despite everything our family had been through. She called me regularly, visited when she could, and always made sure I knew she loved and supported me. Her loyalty meant the world to me during those dark times. David, however, seemed to drift further and further away. He transferred to a college closer to where William and Rebecca lived, officially because of a better education program, but I knew it was really because he preferred their company to mine. He rarely called. His visits home became shorter and less frequent, and when he was there, he seemed to judge everything I did. I threw myself into volunteer work at the local hospital, helping families navigate the emotional challenges of having loved ones in critical care. It was meaningful work that gave me purpose and helped me process my own pain. I also started seeing a therapist, Dr. Patricia Wilson, who helped me understand that I wasn't responsible for other people's choices and that I deserved to rebuild my life on my own terms. Over the years, I watched from a distance as David built his life. He became a high school English teacher just as he had always dreamed, and I was proud of his career success, even if our relationship remained strained. He married his college girlfriend, Amanda, in 1998, a lovely young woman who taught elementary school. They had a small wedding, and while I was invited, it was clear I was expected to keep a low profile so as not to make William and Rebecca uncomfortable. Amanda and I had a cordial relationship, but I could tell she had heard stories about me that made her cautious. She was polite but distant, and I suspected that David had painted me as the difficult ex-wife who couldn't accept the new family dynamics. It hurt to know that my own son was sharing such a distorted version of our family history, but I tried to maintain dignity and hope that time would heal our relationship. Their first child, my grandson Michael, was born in 2001. I was overjoyed to become a grandmother, but my access to the baby was limited and carefully controlled. I could visit, but only at scheduled times that didn't conflict with William and Rebecca's visits. It was as if they were afraid I might contaminate the child with my toxic presence, as David had started calling my influence. The real breaking point came 3 years later, when David and Amanda were going through a rough patch in their marriage. Amanda had confided in Jennifer during one of their rare conversations that David had become increasingly critical and controlling, always comparing their marriage unfavorably to his father's new beginning with Rebecca. She felt like she could never measure up to the idealized relationship that David constantly praised. When their marriage counselor suggested that David examine his relationship patterns and family history, David became defensive and angry. Instead of taking responsibility for his own behavior, he decided that the problem was my negative influence on his life. According to him, growing up in our dysfunctional household had damaged his ability to maintain healthy relationships. The final straw came when David called me one evening in 2004 and announced that Amanda had filed for divorce. But instead of seeking comfort or support from his mother, he launched into a vicious attack on me personally. "This is all your fault, Mom," he said, his voice cold and cruel. "Your toxic presence in my life, your inability to let go of the past, your negative energy, it's poisoned my ability to be happy. Amanda says I'm too damaged from growing up with your constant drama and manipulation. I can't have you in my life anymore if I want to save my relationship with my son." I was so shocked I could barely respond. After years of distance and subtle blame, he was now openly holding me responsible for his marriage's failure and cutting me out of his life entirely. The irony was devastating. He was using the exact same abandonment tactics his father had used, but somehow making me the villain in the story. "David," I managed to say through my tears, "I have always loved you and supported you. I never spoke badly about your father, even after everything he did. How can you blame me for your marriage problems when I've barely been part of your life for years?" His response was immediate and brutal. "Because you taught me that love is conditional, that people leave when things get hard, that it's okay to be a victim instead of taking responsibility. I learned those lessons from watching you, and now I have to unlearn them if I want to be a good father to Michael." He hung up the phone, and I didn't hear from him again for 3 years. Those 3 years were some of the darkest of my life. I felt like I had lost both my son and my grandson. And for what? For refusing to pretend that William's betrayal was somehow my fault? For not being grateful that my son chose his father's happiness over our family's integrity? I spiraled into a depression that required medication and intensive therapy to overcome. Jennifer was my lifeline during this period. She had graduated from Georgetown and was working for the State Department, but she called me every day and visited whenever she could. She was furious with David for cutting me off and had several heated arguments with him about his treatment of me. But her support came at a cost. David also distanced himself from her, claiming she was enabling my toxicity. Dr. Wilson helped me understand that I was dealing with a form of emotional abuse called scapegoating, where one family member is blamed for problems they didn't create. She explained that David had learned this pattern from watching William blame me for their marriage's problems, and now he was repeating the cycle with his own failed relationship. It was during one of our therapy sessions in 2007 that Dr. Wilson suggested something that changed everything. "Margaret, you've spent years trying to prove you're not toxic, not manipulative, not the villain in this story. But what if you stopped defending yourself and started showing them what real toxicity looks like?" At first, I was confused by her suggestion, but she explained that sometimes people need to experience the absence of something to appreciate its value. David had taken my unconditional love, support, and forgiveness for granted his entire life. He had no idea what it was like to have a truly toxic parent, because I had protected him from that experience, even when his father abandoned our family. What would happen, Dr. Wilson asked, if you gave David exactly what he says he wants, a life without your toxic presence, but you also withdrew all the benefits that came with having you as a mother? I spent weeks thinking about her suggestion. Was I really willing to show my son what a toxic parent actually looked like? Was I prepared to face the consequences of such a drastic action? The more I thought about it, the more I realized that my attempts to maintain dignity and take the high road had only enabled David's behavior. He faced no consequences for cutting me off, no loss except the mother he had already decided he didn't want. So, I made a decision that would change everything. I was going to show David what real toxicity looked like, and I was going to do it in a way that would make him understand exactly what he had lost when he threw away my love. My plan began with research. I hired a private investigator to find out everything I could about David's life since cutting me off. What I discovered was fascinating and infuriating. His divorce from Amanda had been finalized, and she had moved across the country with Michael. David was paying substantial child support and only saw his son during school holidays. He was dating a woman named Claire, who worked as a marketing executive and seemed to have little patience for his emotional baggage. More importantly, I learned that David was struggling financially. Teaching didn't pay as well as he had hoped. His child support payments were substantial, and he had taken on significant debt during the divorce. He had been forced to move into a small apartment and was working summer tutoring jobs to make ends meet. The first phase of my plan was simple. I withdrew all the support I had been providing without him even realizing it. For years, I had been sending birthday and Christmas gifts to Michael through Amanda, making sure my grandson knew his paternal grandmother loved him, even if his father prevented direct contact. I stopped sending the gifts and told Amanda that David had made it clear he didn't want me in Michael's life, so I was respecting his wishes completely. I also stopped covering the life insurance premiums for a policy William and I had taken out for David when he was born. I had continued paying the premiums after our divorce, thinking of it as a safety net for my son. Now I let the policy lapse and informed the insurance company that the beneficiary had requested no further contact with the policyholder. Next, I contacted the financial advisor who managed the college fund I had been building for Michael since his birth. The fund contained over $50,000 that I had saved and invested over the years, intending to surprise David with it when Michael reached college age. I closed the account and donated the entire amount to a scholarship fund for underprivileged children, making sure the donation was made in Jennifer's name so David would eventually learn about it. The second phase was more psychological. I began strategically reaching out to people in David's life, not to cause drama, but to share the truth about our family history. I contacted his college friends, work colleagues, and even Claire, always presenting myself as a concerned mother who was worried about the lies David had been telling about our family. I told them about William's affair, about how David had chosen his father's happiness over his mother's well-being, about how I had been made a scapegoat for problems I didn't create. I shared documentation, old letters, photos, and even recordings I had made of some of our phone conversations where David was particularly cruel. I wasn't lying or exaggerating. I was simply making sure people knew the full story, instead of David's one-sided version. The most important contact I made was with Amanda. I reached out to her through social media, expressing my sadness about losing contact with Michael and asking if she would be willing to share the real story of their marriage's breakdown. What she told me was eye-opening and heartbreaking. According to Amanda, David had been emotionally distant and critical throughout their marriage. He constantly compared her to Rebecca, praising his stepmother's independence and ambition while criticizing Amanda for being too needy and too traditional. He had refused marriage counseling until it was too late, claiming that therapy was for weak people who couldn't solve their own problems. Most devastatingly, Amanda revealed that David had been having an emotional affair with a colleague during the final year of their marriage. When she discovered the inappropriate text messages and confronted him, he had blamed her for driving him away with her insecurity and jealousy. The pattern was identical to what William had done to me. Betray the marriage, then blame the betrayed spouse for the relationship's failure. Amanda agreed to document these conversations and provide me with copies of the text messages David had exchanged with his colleague. She also shared photos and videos of Michael that I had missed during our years of separation, and we began building a relationship based on our shared experience of being scapegoated by the men in David's family. The third phase of my plan was the most dramatic. I decided to remarry. At 60 years old, I had never imagined finding love again, but I had reconnected with Robert, a widowed gentleman I had known from church years before. Robert was kind, successful, and completely supportive of my desire to rebuild my life without David's toxic influence. Our wedding was a beautiful affair, attended by Jennifer, Amanda, Michael, and all the friends who had supported me through the difficult years. I made sure photos from the event were posted on social media, showing me radiantly happy, surrounded by people who truly loved and appreciated me. I also made sure the local newspaper covered the wedding, including details about my volunteer work and the scholarship fund I had established. But the most important aspect of the wedding was what it represented. I was moving on completely. I was building a new life with someone who valued me, and I was no longer waiting for David to come to his senses and apologize. I was done being his emotional hostage. The final phase was patience. I knew that eventually, the consequences of David's choices would catch up with him, and when they did, he would realize what he had lost. I didn't have to actively sabotage his life. I just had to make sure he understood that his actions had permanently changed our relationship. The reckoning came sooner than I expected. In 2008, just a year after I had begun implementing my plan, David faced a series of crises that forced him to confront the reality of his situation. Claire broke up with him, citing his emotional unavailability and his tendency to blame others for his problems. His financial situation became even more dire when he lost his summer tutoring income due to budget cuts at the learning center where he worked. Most importantly, Michael, who was now 7 years old, began asking difficult questions about why he never saw his paternal grandmother. Amanda had been honest with him about our relationship, and Michael wanted to know why his father didn't want him to know me. When David couldn't provide a satisfactory explanation, Michael became upset and started acting out at school. It was Jennifer who finally told David about everything I had done: the closed college fund, the canceled life insurance, the scholarship donation made in her name. She also told him about Amanda's revelations regarding their marriage, and about my new marriage to Robert. For the first time in years, David was forced to confront the full scope of what his choices had cost him. The phone call came on a Tuesday evening in March 2008. David's voice was different, smaller, uncertain, lacking the cold confidence he had displayed during our last conversation. "Mom," he said, and just hearing him call me that again almost made me hang up. "I need to talk to you. I think I've made some terrible mistakes." I let him talk. He told me about Claire leaving, about his financial struggles, about Michael's questions and Amanda's revelations. He admitted that maybe he had been wrong about our family history, that maybe he had blamed me for problems that weren't my fault. He even acknowledged that his pattern of abandoning relationships when they became difficult was exactly what his father had done to me. But what he said next revealed that he still didn't fully understand the magnitude of his actions. I was hoping we could work things out, maybe start rebuilding our relationship. "I know I hurt you, but we're family, and family forgives each other, right?" That's when I showed him what real toxicity looked like. "David," I said, my voice calm and controlled, "you spent years telling everyone that I was toxic, that my presence in your life was poisonous. That I was responsible for your inability to maintain healthy relationships. You cut me out of your life and denied me access to my grandson. You made me a pariah in my own family and painted me as the villain in your story. He started to interrupt, but I continued. Now you're facing consequences. Your girlfriend left you. Your finances are a mess. Your son is asking uncomfortable questions. And suddenly you want your toxic mother back in your life. But here's what you don't understand. I'm not the same person I was when you threw me away. I told him about the college fund I had closed, about the insurance policy I had let lapse, about the scholarship donation made in Jennifer's name. I explained that I had shared the truth about our family with everyone in his life, just as he had shared his version of the truth with mine. I described my new marriage and my new life, built around people who actually valued my presence. You wanted to see what life was like without your toxic mother, I said. Congratulations, you got exactly what you asked for. The woman who sacrificed her own happiness for her children, who forgave endless betrayals, who absorbed blame she didn't deserve, that woman is gone. You killed her with your cruelty and abandonment. The silence that followed was deafening. When David finally spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. What are you saying? That you can't forgive me? That we can't be a family again? I'm saying that forgiveness has to be earned, not demanded, I replied. I'm saying that calling someone toxic and then expecting them to welcome you back when it's convenient for you is the height of manipulation. I'm saying that actions have consequences, and you're finally experiencing them. I told him that if he wanted any chance of rebuilding our relationship, he would need to do several things. First, he would need to publicly acknowledge his mistakes and apologize not just to me, but to everyone he had lied to about our family history. Second, he would need to enter therapy and genuinely work on understanding his patterns of blame and abandonment. Third, he would need to make amends to Amanda and commit to being a better co-parent to Michael. And finally, I said, you need to understand that even if you do all of these things, our relationship will never be what it was. You can't unring that bell, David. You can't take back years of cruelty and abandonment and expect everything to go back to normal. The mother who would have accepted your apology unconditionally and welcomed you back with open arms, you destroyed her. David was crying by the end of our conversation, begging me not to give up on him, promising he would do whatever it took to make things right. But I could hear in his voice that he still expected his promises to be enough, still believed that his desire to reconcile should override the pain he had caused. Real toxicity, I told him before hanging up, is making someone else responsible for your happiness and then punishing them when they can't deliver it. Real toxicity is abandoning people who love you and then expecting them to be grateful when you decide to come back. Real toxicity is never taking responsibility for your own choices and always finding someone else to blame. You wanted to see toxicity, son? Look in the mirror. That conversation was 4 years ago, and our relationship today is nothing like what either of us expected it would be. David did follow through on some of my requirements. He entered therapy, he apologized to several people, and he has been working to rebuild his relationship with Michael. But the damage to our bond was too severe to fully repair. We have contact now, but it's limited and conditional. He calls me on holidays and birthdays, visits occasionally when Jennifer is also in town, and has brought Michael to meet Robert and see our new home. But there's a formality to our interactions that never existed before. A careful politeness that acknowledges the permanent change in our dynamic. Michael, now a teenager, has developed a relationship with me independent of his father's approval. He spends a week with Robert and me every summer, and we've built the kind of bond I always hoped to have with my grandson. Ironically, it was my willingness to show David real toxicity that finally freed me to have an authentic relationship with Michael. Jennifer has told me that David often expresses regret about our damaged relationship, that he wishes things could go back to the way they were before. But I think that misses the point entirely. The relationship we had before was built on my willingness to absorb blame and accept mistreatment in the name of family loyalty. The relationship we have now is built on mutual respect and clear boundaries. Do I miss the son who used to call me for advice, who shared his dreams and fears with me, who made me feel needed and important? Of course I do, but I don't miss being his emotional scapegoat, his convenient target for blame when his own choices led to disappointment. I don't miss walking on eggshells, afraid that any wrong word might trigger another abandonment. Robert and I have built a beautiful life together, surrounded by people who appreciate us for who we are rather than what we can provide. I've continued my volunteer work, started a small scholarship foundation, and discovered passions I never had time to explore when I was busy being everyone else's emotional caretaker. Sometimes people ask me if I regret showing David real toxicity, if I think I went too far in my response to his cruelty. My answer is always the same. I regret that it was necessary, but I don't regret doing it. Some people only learn the value of something when they lose it completely, and David needed to lose his idealized, endlessly forgiving mother to understand what he had actually been taking for granted. The scholarship fund I established has helped dozens of young people attend college, young people who will hopefully build healthier relationships than the ones they witnessed in their own families. The students I mentor through my volunteer work often tell me I'm like a mother figure to them, and I treasure those relationships because they're based on choice rather than obligation. If there's one lesson I want people to take from my story, it's this. You don't have to accept mistreatment in the name of family loyalty. You don't have to be grateful for crumbs of affection from people who should love you unconditionally. And sometimes, the kindest thing you can do for someone who takes you for granted is to show them what life is like without you in it. David learned what toxicity really looks like, and it wasn't what he thought it was. It wasn't a mother who loved too much, forgave too easily, or tried too hard to keep her family together. Real toxicity was his willingness to destroy those bonds for his own comfort, to blame others for his failures, and to expect forgiveness without accountability. I showed him real toxicity by giving him exactly what he said he wanted, a life without his mother's influence. And in doing so, I finally found the peace and respect I had been seeking for years. Sometimes the only way to teach someone the value of love is to take it away completely. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is to stop being loving at all. That's my story, dear ones. It's not the fairy tale ending I once dreamed of, but it's honest, and it's mine. I hope it helps you understand that sometimes fighting back isn't about revenge. It's about finally respecting yourself enough to demand that others do the same. Before I go, I want to hear from all of you beautiful souls who've stayed with me through this journey. Your stories matter just as much as mine, and I know that many of you have faced similar betrayals, similar moments where you had to choose between being a doormat and being true to yourself. Share with me in the comments, what would you have done in my situation? Have you ever had to show someone what they were really losing when they took you for granted? Sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is simply witness each other's stories and say, I see you, I understand you, and you're not alone. Your comments create a community of healing that extends far beyond this screen, and I read every single one with gratitude in my heart. Don't forget to subscribe if this story touched something in you. There are so many more stories like this that need to be told, and together we can create a space where truth matters more than comfortable lies.